and we can just let them in. So
Yes, so if anyone would like to be on screen, you can request to, and we'll let you in. Okay, so it's 11:30 here on the eastern part of the United States. So it's time to start. So I'll kick us off. I'm very, very happy to be here. This is our third session of the morning, and it's been absolutely wonderful. And my name is Deborah Barron. I'm here with my colleagues and friends, Wynn Morgan and Jacqueline Hollows. And I am the editor of a publication on Medium called Less Stress, More Success, which is a publication dedicated to sharing the teachings of a gentleman named Sydney Banks and an understanding called Three Principles. So we are hoping that this will be a really nice introduction to you to these principles that have been life-changing to us. And we invite you to make this a first step that you'll be interested in learning more. Jacqueline and Wynn are both contributors to the publication. And one of the things that I've said earlier is that if you do get interested in learning about these principles, and I'd love for you to write about it and submit your articles to the publication. That's really what we're all about, and sharing our experiences of growing our insight in this arena. The topic for this session is why CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, doesn't work. And just want to let you know one of the reasons we chose this session is because this was an article that I wrote, I don't know, a year ago or so, and it's gotten the most amount of attention of any article that I've ever written. So we thought it would be cool to pull it out and elaborate. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Wynn to kick us off. We encourage your questions. We're going to get to as many as we possibly can. Jacqueline was kind enough to share our links in the feed. If your question does not get answered and you would like to, please feel free to reach out to any or all of us individually or collectively, and we will be happy to answer your questions at another time. So Wynn, it's all yours.
Oh, thanks, Deborah. Thanks, Jacqueline, for moderating the questions. And yeah, as Deborah said, please do send them in as we go through. So I'm going to start with this 30-minute session just by sharing a few things before I get into my story of CBT and how that did and didn't help me, and what I found most helpful for me. So the full title of this talk was Why CBT Doesn't Work and What Does. But here's the big disclaimer. I'm only going to share my personal views on this. It doesn't say that CBT can't be helpful, because there were parts of it that I found helpful, and then some things didn't. So I'm just going to share that from a personal perspective, and I'd encourage you to do the same for you, as opposed to the truth that might sound as if, well, he's saying that CBT is a crock of, fill in your favorite expletive. I am not going to be saying that. And in the article that Deborah wrote, which was in my mind very heartfelt article, of sharing that there could be something else that may be available that can answer an awful lot of the questions that CBT might not. So I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist. I've had a bunch of them work with me. And effectively, because kind of my backstory is that I had depression since I can remember. And I remember the first time I had depression, I was probably not much more than a toddler. And then a very serious under the surface of me, I was very serious as a kid. And bouts of depression that I can remember, and a full kind of breakdown at the age of 34, 35. And at that time, I'd had some classical therapy, including cognitive behavioral therapy, and NLP, and lots of other things. But I think CBT was the one that I'd had most time with at that point, and including antidepressants and mood stabilizers and sleeping tablets, because I was an insomniac for a year and a half. which wasn't a particularly happy time in my life, but I can look back now and see how much I learned via that. Here's my overall theme for what I'd like to share is that, in my opinion, what CBT was helping me or trying to help me do was to fix individual thoughts and fix my thinking. And in that mode, I think it can be really helpful. But for me, it didn't work because I had a very strong habit to analyze everything. I'd analyze me, I'd analyze my life, I'd analyze every single thought, every single emotion. And the reason I was analyzing all of that stuff is so much of the things that I thought looked wrong to me, I looked wrong to me, how I felt looked wrong to me, what I thought looked wrong to me. Lots of things in my life out there, people and things looked wrong to me. And then I was really trying to fix it all and fix it all by thinking harder and thinking more into it. And I didn't know that that was in a direction that wasn't helpful. So I'd come away from sessions with my then therapist, who was awesome, by the way. And I will share, in my opinion, what made that therapist so awesome, the one I'm thinking of right now. But I came away from the sessions with sheets of things to document my thoughts and then analyze them a little bit more at a scale of 1 to 10 on their scale of 1 to 10 that. And I bought a few books around this, which was Mind Over Mood and Mind Over Mood, the Practitioner's Guide, which was effectively CBT as a patient and CBT as the therapist. And what that encouraged me to do innocently was do more of the same and more of the analysis, more figuring out, and it didn't give me any relief, none. What was helping during the session with the therapist was her presence and love towards me. I didn't know that that's what was being helpful to me. And when I would leave sessions, I felt better leaving the sessions because someone was listening and was being deeply connected to me in a really loving, non-judgmental way. But I'd come away from those sessions and then look at my worksheets about documenting thoughts, and that took me away from that lovely feeling again. And me saying this, say 16, 17 years later, I can now see this really clearly from this time in my life. Fast forward, about 5 years later, I stumbled across what Deborah just introduced and what Jacqueline, Deborah and myself have been mentioning in a few of the previous talks that we had in two of the previous talks, is that there was something that existed at that time that I'd never heard of called the three principles, which looks at how the mind works as opposed to getting better thinking. And I didn't know that that was available. And I stumbled across this. And then the works of Sydney Banks via a gentleman called Michael Neal, who then introduced me to lots of other amazing three principles practitioners who learned directly from Sydney Banks. And what they kept pointing at was how thought works, how moods work, how consciousness works, and how the mind works. In a really simple way, but I kept then trying to analyze it and thinking that when I understand this, I won't feel bad anymore. And then a wonderful practitioner, a wonderful coach that I had called Barbara Patterson, who was a mentor of mine for a while, slapped me figuratively in the face with some words saying, Win, that's not on offer. And what is on offer, though, Win, is for you to see more deeply of how well you're made and how your psychological functioning works. But you're so trapped in trying to get better thinking and to feel better that you're not giving it a chance. So that's effectively how that conversation went. And that's 10 years ago this month in the town that I'm currently visiting in the Pacific Northwest of the USA. So I thought of a metaphor as I was making coffee this morning of, in my mind, again, the difference between CBT and understanding how the mind works. And I'll go back, I don't know, 400 odd years when Isaac Newton sat under an apple tree and an apple fell. I don't think he was analyzing the apple, but he was looking at behind the scenes of how everything works to notice, wait a minute, there's this force called gravity that is behind everything falling in one direction. But he didn't look at, oh, let's look at an apple. Let's look at apple trees. He saw behind the scenes of everything. And that was a metaphor that to me starts to make sense of understanding that before what a thought is and what a thought does, how thought works as a principle in human beings, how our psychological functionings and our spiritual functioning, that works in us. So here's what I've learned that's been really helpful for me. To see that we all think as human beings. Not new news, right? Greek philosophers have been saying that for a few thousand years, right? A few thousand years ago that they said, I think, therefore I am. What isn't so easily seen, though, or appreciated, in my opinion, by us, and certainly not by me until quite recently, is that thought works in a really amazing way. And the power of thought is that it brings the outside world to life. It helps me experience, for example, this coffee. It helps me experience the taste of that. It helps me experience the view. It helps me experience my past, even though my past isn't happening now. It enables me to experience tomorrow or where I'm going for the rest of the day today, even though I'm still sitting in this chair looking at a computer screen and imagining that you're all listening and looking back. All of that's happening in my mind, not actually happening in the world, past, the future. And also me and my identity, all of that is happening in my own mind. In a talk that Jacqueline, Deborah, and I gave earlier on, and Deborah mentioned this, is that thought works like a ticker tape, or that if you're watching the news channels and sometimes there's the text that goes along the bottom of the screen with the headlines, constantly flowing. And what I do and what we all do is we have a thought and then we think about it. Or we have a thought and don't even know we're thinking of it, and it has an emotion that's brought to life from that thought. And then I think more about it. And I think more about that emotion and I try and figure out my life. And I have a bad feeling that I want to go away. And then I think myself out of the bad feeling. I also can have a bad feeling of feeling I don't like as opposed to a bad feeling, because in my mind there's no such thing as a bad feeling. I just have preferences for certain feelings and emotions. And what that helps me to see is that if it's true that emotions come from what I'm thinking right now, not from what is happening right now, and if it's true that thought is like that ticker tape or the headlines, then I don't have to do anything about it because it goes away in its own accord. I don't even have to do the letting go. And feelings will be in the ebb and flow in the same way as everything in nature is in its ebb and flow. And just because I've had low moods and feelings I prefer not to have, it doesn't mean anything about me, because I really thought there was something wrong with me. And the clue was in that sentence, I really thought there was something wrong with me. And I can think that doesn't make it true. That to me was life-changing, because we all think and our thinking looks real to us. That's it. And in fact, I can imagine anything about anything that I can think. I will make meanings up out of things all the time. And just because I have a habit of making gloomy meanings of things, it doesn't mean anything, then I've got a habit of making gloomy things out of things. And when I saw that all that was my imagination doing what an imagination can do, I eventually saw the freedom in that. And sometimes the humor and the magic in my ability to imagine anything. So that's my starter of what I found for me that worked more effectively than CBT for me, given my diagnosis of bipolar 2 and various things that people have said that I had, which, by the way, were helpful in the moment because they helped me not take it so personally that there was someone else with this condition. Well, as it happened, the condition that I'm in is being a human being. So taking thought as true, seeing thought as permanent, taking thought as personal was just something that I was innocently doing because that's how thought works in human beings. Oh, and one other point before I come to the questions, and also to ask Jacqueline and Deborah for anything else that they wanted to add, is that here's what I also didn't know. When my mood was low, what I thought looked more real. But it didn't make it more real, it just looked more real. It was the special effects of having a low mood. This is how a low mood manifests out in a human being. My thinking looks more sticky, it looks more real, and it looks more personal. It doesn't mean that it is. Again, huge life-changing and life-saving thing. I would go that far. For me, it's been life-saving. And then being able to share that with other people in the business world or in other worlds that they're in over the last kind of decade has been something I constantly pinch myself about, given the freedom that this is allowing other people. I know Deborah and Jacqueline are doing a heap of amazing work as well in their own fields with this. So I wanted to start with that, and I don't know, Deborah and Jacqueline, what you'd like to add or questions that you'd like us to explore.
I have something, Win. You've got some interesting comments, but no real questions in the chat. It's resonating with people, so that's good. My question was, when CBT does work, what's happening?
Such a good question. Love that.
Well, to me, what springs to mind is that it's getting me to question it, but getting me to question it with curiosity as opposed to an analytical way. That's what I think it allows, because I think that's a beautiful question. What makes it work when it does and not when it doesn't? Yeah. I don't know if that answers it, Jacqueline.
Yeah, of course, there's not one answer, is there? And what I've seen about that was that when CBT works, or NLP, or any of those reframing type of therapies work, it's because somebody has had a shift internally. They've had an insight, which is what you're saying. You're able to see something differently, and it looks like it's the CBT that made that work, but actually it's the same thing that we're talking about. It's what makes CBT work when it does, which isn't all the time, is that the person has an insight, and then their whole perspective changes, their life changes, because they see the world differently. So yeah, I just think that's really a really interesting.
I had an insight recently, which is kind of enough related that I'll share it. So one of the way that I found the principles was that I was watching Rich Litvin coach. Rich is not a 3 principles practitioner, but he learned from Michael Neal as Michael was transitioning to become a 3 principles practitioner. And Rich mentioned Michael's name, and I said, oh, I wonder what Michael Neal's like. And I went searching for Michael. And Michael has a TED Talk called Why Aren't We Awesomer, which I encourage everyone to watch. It's wonderful. And I just assigned it to a group that I've been coaching recently as a homework assignment. So I went to watch it again, and I've seen it dozens of times. But this time I heard something new. In his TED Talk, Michael gives a story about how he had a suicidal break from reality, and he felt like he was being pulled out of a window. And he was holding onto the wall to help prevent himself from jumping out the window. And he says in the TED Talk that what he realized was that he can have a thought that isn't his thought. And that struck me in such a deeper way that someone could have a thought that's just a suicidal thought and then realize that they don't agree with that thought. That was so profound to me, that we can have thoughts that they're like, it's like they are ours because they come from us, but they're not ours because we don't agree with them. Fascinating.
Beautiful. I've just noticed a question here from Manisha. I'll just go ahead and read it and then give my opinion on an answer to that. So Manisha says, I am a therapist and I'm wondering how I can bring spirituality stroke philosophy like your experience versus traditional therapy and to ensure that the client feels I'm well informed. Thanks. Well, Manisha, I want to answer the last point first of all, to ensure that I'm well informed. In my mind, I wouldn't want to have that on anyone's mind. The best of me when I'm with a client is my presence in the moment, not my information, my feeling, my heart, as opposed to what I know or don't know. And I certainly don't want to have how credible do they think I am? Do my clients think I am? I do not want to have that on my mind either, because that will get in the way. I've now got my attention on me and my attention on my insecurities. So to answer the first part of your question, keep looking and getting curious. And what you will do will take care of itself. The questions you will ask will take care of themselves. The metaphors and what you share about what you've heard will change over time, but you can't accelerate, you can't kind of be ahead of yourself on that, because I've learned that I was trying to be ahead of myself and talking myself into things that I don't really understand and not noticing that I wasn't being heartfelt. Because going back to Jacqueline's question, why does it work when it does work? And my experience with a therapist I was thinking of when I was in my mid-30s, it was her heart that I was feeling. That heals. That makes a bigger difference than I ever appreciated. So, and to me, the fact that you're bringing that question up means you're probably doing an awesome job at that already, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll just add to that a little bit. Like, I mean, I'm certainly not a therapist, and there's something so powerful about just sharing your own experience of healing, right? When you see this, all you have to do is share what you see and how it impacted you, and then anyone you're talking with can take that they can take what makes sense for them to take. So it really just becomes a sharing as opposed to any kind of a teaching or therapy. This is what I've experienced. This is what worked for me. And this is what changed for me. And then if somebody hears something from that, then they can go, oh, like, I wonder.
So there's a few other questions here. There was one that I was reading and then it moved along the screen here. So I'm trying to find that one again. Alessandra, You asked an amazing question here, but it will take me a while to actually read through it. But effectively, the one part on it you were talking about here that I think I do want to mention about, because you mentioned, can it feel like gaslighting? In my opinion, no. Now, anything that anyone says could appear as gaslighting, and I'd want to have that conversation if anything I say or anything anyone else says appears that way. But I wouldn't want to diminish anyone's personal experience, because it's to the second part of your question is, in my opinion, in the same way that you're saying here, is that all feelings are teachers. Yes, I agree. And I don't want to not feel things anymore. I used to be afraid of having certain emotions and feelings. And right now, I normally don't. Sometimes I have a strong preference, and in a low mood, it will look an awful lot more serious to me, and I will get in my head about things. But it says here, there was one part of this that I really wanted to speak to as well. It was something about moods having a valid reason for a low mood. And this is something that only each of us can see for ourselves, what that actually means. So I'm not going to give here's the gospel answer to that, because that would be a version of, in my mind, of gaslighting. I'd encourage you to look for yourself, and all of us to look for ourselves about what that actually does mean. Because in my opinion, when I'm in a low mood, the reason is because I'm in a low mood. And there isn't an external factor, because I can take anything external to mean anything. The meaning is happening in me completely innocently. And what I've noticed is that when I am in a low mood, which still happens, it lifts of its own accord far quicker and easier than it used to. And I'm no longer so concerned about being down. And I had a down that lasted about 6 months, from, I think, about late November right the way through until, well, spring of this year, spring in the Northern Hemisphere. And I wasn't so concerned about it. And it lifted of its own accord. And what I noticed as well, 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in my garden having coffee at home on a Sunday morning, and I'd been in a very high hyper state for probably, I don't know, a week. And I'd had 3 days where I was being really productive and working late into the evenings and not having much sleep. And then on this Sunday, I had this thought of, well, I know what happens next. After I have a high, I'm going to have a low mood. And then I thought, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's what's going to happen. I know I can't predict the future. Now, as it happened, and one reason I thought I was doing that was for me to be careful over not hyperextending myself, which is kind of wise. But within a minute, I was back. I walked back inside my house and was at the office, and I worked for the next hour and a half. And I went, yeah, that was quite helpful, but I don't have to be so involved in it. Now, I have no idea to what extent that's helped Alessandra, but I hope you did something in that.
Can I add a little something there?
Sure.
The thing that's occurring to me is that, for me, like, there's been something so powerful about this, seeing the spiritual nature of our experiences and the universal nature of it. And when I see this incredible, can you guys hear me? I just got a message that I'm having audio problems. Okay. When I see this incredible spiritual gift that I've been given called thought, I start to feel the exquisiteness of every thought created emotion that I experience. It sends me before the psychology into this beautiful spiritual nature. That's it.
I think that's beautiful as well. And that, to me, that answers quite a few of the questions that I've just browsed through. Jacqueline,
Yeah,
what to say
I was
to
just going to say exactly the same thing, is that all the questions sound like they're different, and they're obviously very individual, and we're not doctors, so we can't comment on medication or even if one needs therapy. What we're ultimately pointing to is exactly what Deborah just beautifully said. It's everybody has access to their spiritual nature. We're all born with it. We're all born with equal measures. And it's there that we can look to find the answers. And that's the most helpful place to look. And that can be in different forms at different times, whether that's therapy or medication or nature or exercise or nutrition, etc., etc., etc. But those are just forms of being able to get back to that spiritual nature. We're at time. Rita, everybody, thank you so much.
Yeah, and please
reach out to us.
Yes, we would all love to hear from any and all of you. So thank you for being here. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.